Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? It was muted somehow. To figure it out. Let's see, settings, audio. You can hear me now because it's saying you can hear me now on my end. Oh, good. Oh, good. Thank God. You guys have no idea. My dear, sweet youngest child decided to get me a new phone and got me one of these great big flip phones. This is like, you flip it like this and move it like that. And I've spent the entire weekend making sure that I was still attached to YouTube and everything else and having to change passwords and crap. And I did just get an update on my computer. So I'm sure that's what knocked my audio off. I am so sorry. Okay. For those of you who couldn't hear the first part, I will say it one more time. When I was preparing to continue to do some feng shui stuff and some things about numbers and the tarot and things, I got a visit from Cecil. And he said, "You do understand we have kind of a limited amount of time to get these people up to speed on elementals." And I'm trying to pull my notes over so I don't sound like a complete fool. And so I said to Cecil, "Well, yeah, I understand." And Cecil said, "Not everyone has the same universal image of a dinosaur, of a dragon." And the reason that they don't is that because different societies have seen different dragons different ways. So we're going to, Cecil, you go by. So, and I'm going to make this the big guy. I'm going to go like this. Okay, nope. Two. Okay. This is kind of a map of where dragons are from all around the world. And I'm sorry about my editing, but I don't crop things real well. And there's there's Native American dragons, and I have that picture. I'll be talking about that. There's dragons in England. England's dragons tend to be littler than the other dragons around Europe. Most people think of dragons, they think of China and they think of Japan, but there are dragons in Central and South America. There's several major temples from the Mayans that show dragon-like creatures. Some dragons have wings, some dragons don't have wings. So I said, okay, where should I said, I know about Japanese, and I knew that the Japanese first emperor was supposedly the product of a dragon and a human. And Cecil assured me that does not happen often. And yes, Wales has the dragon on its flag. And I said, okay, so what should we kind of know about dragons? And he said, well, it might be good to look at the different kinds of dragons people have thought there are. But the biggest differentiation is the dragons in the Far East were considered really good guys, and they bring good luck. And the dragons in the Western culture that came out of the Indo-European mix down here, in that area, they're considered bad luck or real controlling, have a lot of control over weather and stuff. And they really are not very nice guys. But in the ancient myths, they were part of the dragons in the Western culture created the rivers, which meant they could create the floods. It also meant they could take the flood waters away and take their ability to grow crops away. So they're considered very, very, very controlling. And so in China, the dragon represented the one half of yin and yang. The other half of yin and yang is, at one point, the fire dragon got in a big fight with the water dragon, which became the phoenix kind of dragon. They got in a big tussle and they kept going round and round and round, and that symbol became the yin and the yang. And they each have a bit of the other in them, as you know, if you've seen that symbol. And I'm sorry I blanked on putting that symbol in here. But in Chinese have kind of the most longest records and the most written about dragons are dragons in Western culture from your if you're Eurocentric come from Beowulf, and there are also dragon tales in Africa. And he said maybe if you talked about that with them for the it's okay, Annette, you would have had 3 minutes of dead air because my microphone wasn't working. Um, if I went through the different definitions of the different kinds of specialized dragons there are in China, and there are spiritual dragons, underground dragons, which is also more of a European thing, that they lived in caves and protected gold. Horned dragons, winged dragons, yellow dragons, celestial dragons, which is the constellation Draco, which is up near the North Star. If you get a good star chart and you live in a place that doesn't have too much light pollution, you can see that constellation. Then there's the dragon of the hidden treasures, which is in the Western culture would be kind of like Tolkien's Smoog, who hoarded all the gold and treasure and things. That's also part of a legend in China about them hoarding. And then there's the coiling dragon, which is more the real idea of a coiling dragon is more important in when you talk about African dragons. And then there's the dragon king who lords over everything. And like I said, in Japan, they believe that their first emperor was born from a dragon. And yes, that's also um, the eclipses of the sun, which we will be having on the 25th. People thought the dragons up there were eating the sun. In the legend of the first emperor, to make a long story short, they gave him a box when he had gone to visit sort of the dragon relatives, and they said, "Don't open the box." And he thought he'd just left Japan and was going right home, and he got home and found out 300 years had passed. So obviously, dragons have a lot in common with time dimension warps, and he in frustration he opened up the box, and in it was a little image of a dragon, and as soon as he laid his eyes on it he began to age very rapidly, and he died shortly thereafter. I'll talk about the dragon skeleton they think was in the cave. That was a way to control them. It's one of the oldest archaeological sites in Spain. Dragons, of course, since they've been so key in Chinese legends, they fit on the I thought I had it. They fit on the feng shui layout picture. Where are you now? Add to stream. Okay, you got to get out of here. I'll figure this all out. And then I'm going to add this to the stream. Dragons are on here, and they have to do with earth and fire. And they put on here that it's reptilian, and it's really dragons is what they're looking for. But they're a part of the feng shui wheel, and this is the sign of yin and yang, and that's what was created by a fire dragon fighting with the water dragon, and they ended up in a phoenix-like clutch where you go from one cycle into the other, go round and round, and a bit of each part of your essence is caught in those little eyes, the white eye and the black swirl, and the black eye and the white swirl. Oh, someone commented they were born in the year of the dragon. Then you have something in common with my grandson, and I'll show you where they are. Where'd it go? I pulled it over here. Okay. It's not the best blow up. I tried to blow it up and I either blew it up and you couldn't see it. But the year of the dragon happens every 12 years. And 1964, 1976, 1988, year 2000, 2012 was when my grandson was born, which is the year of the dragon, and 2024. And the significance of the year of the dragon is actually, let's see if we can do it that way. No, I'm going to do it. Move from stream. Those years are, people are considered a blessed year. And in Asia, women try to get pregnant and have, families try to get pregnant and have babies on that in that year in order to, they're considered really smart. And I know I went down and helped at my grandson's grade school a couple times, and I was just blown away. His class of first and second graders was absolutely beyond anything I would have thought first and second graders would have been at. So that's another thing. And the other thing is that we have dragons have colors. White dragons symbolize purity and virtue. Someone just asked that. Black dragons represent revenge. Red dragons are lucky and good fortune. Blue and green dragons symbolize the approaching of spring, new life, and plant growth. Yellow dragons represent wisdom and good fortune and power. And golden dragons symbolize prosperity, strength, harvest, and power. And in China, for a long time, they had rules kind of like in England where you couldn't wear purple unless you were part of the royal family. You couldn't wear dragons unless you were considered a dragon person. This is all kinds of, and this stuff's hung around for us today, till today. But really, the biggest part of all of this is that in Western culture, dragons were considered dangerous and deceitful and evil. And Chinese, by contrast, were considered friendly and helpful to people. But the other part of this is if you read through some of their myths, and that's what I've been doing for the last few days, guys, there's things that dragons do to kind of, they sort of show the human failings. They show humans being weak. They have a shadow side to them. Unfortunately for most people, the Western dragons are all shadow side. But in China, they had a lighter side, a side that emitted light and was helpful, and a part that was dark. And so when I was reading this stuff, I meditate on Cecil. And I said, okay, what am I supposed to make of that? And Valerie B just got it right. Dragons, I'm going to highlight this. This is what he said, is dragon energies help us clear the lower vibrations and much, much more. And they make us aware that we have that duplicity. And I said, well, I don't call them my guardian angels because I think they have a dark side. What's the deal? And he said, that's because the guardian angels and anything that comes from outside of the earth does not have the duality of the 3D density that we chose to be born in. And we have the free will to make the deal to decide which way we're going to go. And he said, that's what people need to understand, because they're going to see more and more of us. And as I do more of my, Nancy talks about the legends they've left for us like breadcrumbs to follow. We're going to understand that the elementals help us reflect on and deal with our dark side and how to tie into our light side and how to do that. And the Chinese just have it down to a fine art. They have a turtle that's kind of elongated and kind of looks like a turtle dragon hybrid. And it's bishi, I think is how they say it. It's a turtle shape with sharp teeth. And it's found on a lot of gravestones and monuments because it's supposedly helping you through that. There's a yellow scaly dragon that likes to excel in music and adorns musical instruments. Snakes with leopard heads. There's a lot of chimera action in dragons. Chimera is an animal that looks like two different animals, and there's even a dragon that likes lawsuits and stands to guard. They would make statues of that at jail gates, and sometimes they're just dragons. And if I can find this guy, he's kind of a, I don't know where he went. Let me see if I got him in here. I never did get a decent picture of him, but there was a beautiful gold medallion that was very typical of things that would be over Chinese doors, and he's sort of wrapped around himself. So we're going to leave China now, and we're going to leave the wait a minute, let's hide. We're going to leave those guys, and we're going to talk about I found a site called Sociomix, and if you can go there, you can read all this stuff on your own. But I'm going to kind of go through. I've done the Chinese and the Japanese dragons, but I'm going to talk about European dragons. European dragons were born out of the Indo-European. We got it from, they claim, the Mesopotamian and those guys. And they have those giant winged creatures that look like half lion, half dragon kind of creatures. Griffins also look like half lions, half dragons. And they were very much into vengeance and wreaking vengeance on people. And let's see. And there were people who were afraid of dragons, and the whole idea of if you ran into a fire-breathing one, which is one of those tales that's out there, they could wipe you out. And it's sort of like mass bombing, kind of like, unfortunately, what's happening in Ukraine. You want to see mankind reliving that nightmare. And people would fear them because they were fire. And of course, in most of Europe, once the Christian ideals took over, they were really heavy duty into that sort of destructive stuff. And Celtic dragons, though, the Celtic myths had kind of a lighter sort of dragons, and they kind of were helpful to people. They had reverence for dragons and serpents, and considering there's supposed to be no snakes in Ireland, you kind of wonder how that ever happened. But they in a lot of their legends show wisdom and nobility. So you can kind of tell Celts were always kind of off on their own little world like that, as opposed to the rest of Europe now. Okay, and I'm going to show you a picture of jumping across the ocean again. Here we go. That's a Native American cave drawing, and someone went in and accentuated that to show you what it looks like. But that is a Native American dragon. And you can see it looks much like a European one. It has wings. It also has horns, but they're like elk horns, not like kind of horns you see on a lot of the dragons. They have a long tail. They have claws. Oh, by the way, you can tell the difference between a Japanese dragon and a Chinese dragon. Japanese dragons only have 3 toes. Chinese dragons can have up to 6 toes. So if you're just looking at a picture and said, I wonder what culture it came from, they leave us clues. And that Native American is one of the few dragon pictures that they can find. And they were in the southeast woodlands. And in the southwest, there's a venomous lizard that they said was the spawn of a dragon. Now we're going to go to Africa, because I think the African myths around dragons are the most interesting. because they tie into let's see, Japanese dragon. Well, some things are like dragon like Hydra, if you've read the Greek myths about Hydra with all the heads. And they also, before we leave Asia, I need to let you know about the Buddhists. The Buddhists think they're okay. And they think that they roar out, the roaring that comes out of the mountain. Okay, I'm going to put this up so if somebody wants to find a fun way to look and learn all the different dragons, other than going blind on the internet. There's a dragon called a Druk, and it's in the highlands, it's in the Himalayas, it's all over. And there's a Tibetan branch of the Buddhists that's called Drukpa Kagyu. And I'm sure I've done that completely wrong. And I've never tried to say Tibetan words before. But it embraced the energy and the power and the wisdom of the Druk in its faith. And the reason they did that was, the legend is, as a monastery was being built, a giant thunderstorm raged, and giant thunderstorms are attached to a lot of the different dragons. And thunder was thought to be the roar of that dragon. And so the founder of the monastery took this as a sign, and they changed the name to Those Born in Thunder as the name of their monastery. Tibetan dragons are different. Chinese dragons are kind of big and beefy, and they don't always have wings, but they sometimes have wings. Almost all the Japanese ones had wings of some sort. But the Tibetan dragons have a long, thin body, and they thought that was an adaptation to the high altitudes they live on. They have 4 legs, and they also have 5 toes like the Chinese. They live in the snowy mountains, and they take care of the Himalayas. Tibetan dragons are almost always seem virtuous, and they're trying to spread wisdom. They discern what is truth and what is not. The monks claim they join them in meditation. So when somebody asks the question, how, if we're inside when the weather gets nasty, how do we get in touch with the dragons? Well, in theory, considering that most of them think that dragons are born out of thunderstorms, if you've gotten a thunderstorm, providing you're not holding a pole up to catch the lightning, that would be a good way to go meet with them. And they're solitary and almost invisible to humans. And that was the other thing that Cecil emphasized to me about why we have to understand what dragons are like. People could see them. When the vibration of the world was higher and we hadn't sunk completely into 3D and hadn't sunk completely into fear and hate and division, many people were vibrating at 4D, 5D, and they were able to see them. And as we ascend up and get into higher vibrations, we'll be able to be more likely to see them and understand who they are. And we need to listen. We need to not just always think that they're nasty, bad things, because in Africa, the African dragons were commonly, they're not as well known, but they are a very strong part of a lot of African myths and legends and creation stories. And they have a really interesting one. And here we go, kids. I'm going to blow up some other language. The Nanu Buluku, and I think I'm saying that right, was the first primal god, and he was a dragon. And he was creating the earth, and he couldn't do it all on his own. So he brought in the rainbow serpent, known as Idu Huidu. And I'm not sure if that's right. Weedu. I think it's just Idu Weedu. And what the dragons did is they twisted all around the land and created land. They created rivers, they created valleys. And while it created mountains to nourish for the plants to live on and the plants could grow, once the earth was finished and they were done with what they needed to be done with in Africa, they retreated, and it was so packed, they so completely loaded up the African continent that they were afraid that the world would be crushed if they kept their weight on it. So that's when Nanu Buluku thought he was too heavy. So he decided he'd wrap himself around the world and his energy around the world and protect it, and it would kind of hold it in place. And so he looped his body around the world, but of course, once he got to the other end, he had to bite his own tail so he could kind of hold himself together. And that became known, at least in the Egyptian depictions of that part of the creation myth, as the Ouroboros. That's that thing you see where the snake goes around and around and around. And so he, that's what he did. And then, however, he couldn't, he could, the I do, who helped him build all this, couldn't take the heat. The earth got too warm when it had all this great plant life and stuff. So the first guy, the Nanabukalu, created oceans for him to swim in. And he also provided him with red monkeys that would bring him food to eat for himself. So while he's holding the world down, he can kind of get some nourishment here. And it's thought that if he doesn't get his food, that he and the other one that's in the oceans, that is also wrapped around the world, but in the oceans, that if they have to break to eat, if they don't get enough food and they have to break to go hunting, the world will fall apart. So that's what that little snaky thing is. It looks like it. Sometimes it looks just like an infinity. Now we're going back to how does we're going to go back to these guys. Okay. And I'm going to tell you, when I read about this one, it kind of freaked me out because the Iroquois and the Algonquin had the best recorded histories of these dragon-like creatures, and they think they live in the Great Lakes. Now, I grew up in the Great Lakes, that's where I used to swim. And I kind of, that really did freak me out because, well, first it said they were in Lake Ontario. And so I thought, well, that's not so bad. I swim in Lake Huron, but it'd have to get from Huron to Ontario to get me. And then as I read further in the legend, that's where they they saw him the most, but actually he was everywhere. And also it could leap around. And this thing has a name I can't say. So go to Sociomix, SOCIO Mix, and read this lady's name. Her name is Roebuck that wrote this article. And there was one tribe that worshipped this giant egg, and they were never able to find it when they had heard about it. But the way they described it, it came from the sky, so they think it was a giant meteorite. So, okay. And then this the one that another one I can't say, but I think it's called Quetzalcoatl, and that's the dragon that goes into Mexico into here, and they actually have him sliding down the steps of one of the step pyramids, and at certain times of the year, the way it's carved, it creates this whole giant dragon creature on the stairs. It's fascinating, and it was the most revered and most universal god in Mesoamerica. So it came from somewhere, guys. He was a protector of craftsmen. This is where you get to where dragons are more protective than in Europe, where they always thought they were stealing maidens. The Aztecs believed he invented books and the calendars, and he's responsible for the organization of the original cosmos and is credited with the creation of humans. He's so well respected that the high priest included his name in their titles. Okay. And then there's some dragons from Middle Europe, and they also could be very kind. In Armenia, they represented water, fertility, wealth, and incredible power. But they could have a vile streak if they didn't get what they wanted their way. Oh, by the way, you can see that little ring where the snake's eating itself. That's Africa. And they're another group that falls back on the sacrificing women to them. I thought that was just what the U.S. Senate and House wanted to do. The U.S. Supreme Court just did to us, but apparently it's an old legend from Middle Europe. They lived high in the skies, up in the mountains. Any place that has mountainous regions, they always stick the dragons up there. But okay, but you turn on Game of Thrones and you know what you're going to see, and you know what they look like. And in actual fact, most of them just look like that. That's a salamander. That is a part of the elementals. They are considered connected to fire. And they, I'm sorry I'm saying so much today, but I'm really tired, guys. Setting up a phone all weekend was not my idea of a good time. You do. But most of the dragons we see now, there is a certain amount of, in ancient times, or even not so ancient times, when they started finding dinosaur bones, or they started finding whale bones where on land where it never occurred to them that we were under the water. So I said to Cecil, okay, so what do I do with all this? I mean, obviously I understand the idea that the human brain creates metaphors for its own shortfallings, or for its own really, what a great guy am I, or what a great gal am I, or what a great person am I. And he said, what the people need to understand is, as we emerge, we're trying to emerge into the light. The reason we had to go into inner space, which is the dimension where I met them, and it is on the earth, actually. The reason they had to go there was because centuries ago, and he said, universes ago, he told me, he said, well, the reason you accepted a dragon so quickly is because you saw one in Atlantis. And I went, a what? I go, really? And I looked it up, and there were dragons in Atlantis, and they were part of the myths and what we call myths or legends, or the stories, the oral history that's been handed up from there. There were dragons there, and they were considered wise, and they communicated information that we wouldn't know otherwise. They would sort of speed up the process. They'd bring us good news, tell us what to do. So I assume everybody else was there, all the other elementals. But he said the elementals are like us. They live on a 3D planet. I've read, and I asked Cecil flat out, can you guys die? Because there are some histories that say, oral histories that say they can't die. They just sort of transmute into another form. Never got an answer on that, guys. So if you're waiting on that one, I don't got it. My instinct is that if they're from this planet and they're like us, yes, they can cease to be, but then they get transmuted to another form, because nothing kind of goes away completely. Why now for them and us? Because they are a product of Gaia. And as we all know, we're trying to hurt poor Gaia worse than she ever should have been sucker punched. And understanding the different ways dragons were seen around the world seemed to me the best way to get at it. And when you think about it, the way we look at them in history, the Chinese and the Japanese, which had a much stronger feudal hold, their dragons were considered beneficent, and they, as long as you worked with the group that was in charge, you were going to be taken care of. Now, in Europe, they were much more separated, much more warlike, and their legends involving the dragons. The most famous one, I don't know if they still teach it. Maybe many of you managed to escape the fate of having to read Beowulf, but I had to read it when I was in high school, and that's a legend where he goes to fight. Beowulf goes to fight the dragon. The dragon kills him, but Beowulf gets to see the treasure. And that's another treasure hoarding dragon that was out there. So as you read Tolkien, or you go see the Lord of the Rings movies, or you go see Game of Thrones, there's a lot of things that when you read about the dragons and the dragons they portray there, that came straight out of Western legends. The Game of Thrones is that they were a mark for a royal family, just like I told you. In China, you couldn't wear a dragon on your clothing unless you'd reached a certain status. They've always kind of had that bent towards them. And for us, we need to understand that how we view them and what we see in them. I'm going to get him out of here. Remove. Okay. Are going to be all important for us to understand. Now, I don't. Oil painter. Look on the shore and see if you can find a Nessie sort of thing swimming around. Yes, the Ouroboros. Oil painter. Thank you. I knew. Okay, this is the snake that's eating itself. And I actually had people ask me questions about things that had happened in their lives about dragons. What do I think we need to do about dragons before I get into people's specific questions? Dragons are just a reflection of who we are inside. And somebody said, how do you find a dragon? I didn't. They found me. And it's still kind of, because people come to me and say, how do you learn to do that? And I don't remember. It just comes. And that's kind of where I am. And I'm not being, well, I don't, I'm not going to teach you. I don't know if I could teach people to do things. I can teach people to read tarot. I can teach people to understand their psychic. But I think the fact that I couldn't find a group that didn't have a dragon and a different thought about a dragon. In China, they think of them as more beneficent, but they consider those that coalesce around the single leader. That's just kind of their mentality. And I mean, it's historically, of course, a lot of it's because it was pressed on them because the guys weren't very nice. But you come over to Western and it's kind of every person for themselves, which I think brings out a darker energy in us. And so therefore we would see a reflection of the dragons that came into our world as a darker reflection. I really like the dragons that pray with the Buddhist monks. So I would say if you want to get in touch with the dragons, your best shot is probably to go do that. Go meditate and think about it. And think about if, I'm working on other critters that are out there, that are part of this gang, and I'm trying to get messages from them. They're trying to not overwhelm me. And trust me, this one almost overwhelmed me, but I knew it was one of the most universal of symbols. And there's actually been people who have written fictional books. If the world had moved differently and dragons had stayed, what would they look like? And they had all different kinds. One's in the water and one's in the air and all that stuff. And so, it's kind of a fun thing to look at, and that might help you define where you're going to find your dragon. But this was, how do we bridge the gap between human behavior and dragons, and I typed my answer on the bottom to her, Eliza. It's understanding dragon legends. Now, I abbreviate, people write me long questions, and I really try to hold all that background information in my mind, but I only have so many characters I could put on this question thing. So, um, but that's why they want us to understand and look at them, look at our perceptions of them and what the human mind has held in about them, so that we can work with them more effectively and move forward. And this was from All Painter. Okay. Okay, guys, I'll take a few questions because we've got about 15 minutes left. But, Oil Painter, I have no problem believing this about you at all, Diana. I used to dream about being the mother of dragons as a child and imagine a cave full of my loyal subjects. Stuffed toys were there with me. And she mentioned, I mean, I know her age. There was no Game of Thrones, there was no Mother of Dragons. And I think the guy who did Game of Thrones, I think the guy who did a Tolkien, and the other people, C.S. Lewis, I think they were channeling a lot of primal mental thoughts that we have. They were being psychic without being psychic. I mean, sitting thinking they're doing that. This is coming out of my imagination. It's what I think. And I think it's not so much what I think, it's what I know. And you knew that there were. There's also this deal about dragons, too. Do dragons have 2 feet? Are they bipedal, or do they walk on their hands? And so the Game of Thrones people, when they went to animate the dragons in Game of Thrones, they used a bat model because there's like little bitty bats, and they have back legs that they can hang with, but they also can use parts of their wing arms to walk, and they adapted that. That's, you can find all those images. I mean, I must have gone through hundreds of images trying to figure out which one would show us things that I was going to talk about. And this is my other question. How to communicate if we can't go outside? You don't have to. You have to just meditate on them. And they'll fit in any size room. My room is not a huge bedroom where Cecil comes and talks to me. I just sit in my pretty red chair that I get calm in and find a space like that. Or go out for a walk. If you can get outside, go out for a walk in the woods and say, who's here? And check it out. And I hope it works for you. So I'm going to look and see if I can find. Okay. Perhaps one of your old warrior selves was in China. And that would make sense with what we read. Yes. And our inner space does have an unlimited size. So you can. Oh, that's sweet. Lieber's lady, her late husband lived in loved sci-fi books. We had a collection of dragon items. I would see dragons. I think of him. I donated to several forums. Um, it and the animal rescue, and I think he's smiling. I think he is smiling. I think these kinds of. Yes, this is another dragon series. You can go read if you want. I think when people are writing about those things, I think they're channeling in different ideas that have developed over time, and we should pay attention to it. And let's see, I'm going to go up and see if anybody had a question. My mom are both golden dragons. Good. I always have my eyes peeled close to Saginaw Bay. That'll work if you're looking for them, And remember, if they're interdimensional creatures, they're not going to be there every day waiting for lunch. They're going to be in and out. I'm trying to think, wait a minute. This is so awesome. I am drawn to them. I don't know that much about them. Really honest to God, and I read a lot of stuff, and I sat through some really fascinating documentaries on, all the ins and outs and tracking down the legends. The one thing that Cecil kept telling me was really important was for us to understand how, when we read the legends and we read the stories, he calls them the stories of what happened. So I guess St. George did slay the dragon, but he says to look at she, I guess Cecil's a he, um, to look at what part that brings out in us. What do we see? What do we see reflected? Because they're very earthbound behaviors. They're not heavenly or blessed or sacred or anything else. And he said they are a true lesson that you cannot understand the light unless you understand the dark. And that's what they're here for. Lauren, there's several different Native American dragons. There's ones from the southeast. There's one in the desert in the southwest. There's one like, I guess it's the Utah area. They found some carvings. Oh, I know what I was going to go back to. Did you really have 2 dragon children? Oh, poor girl. How are you raising them? Let's see. Yeah, I'm the year of the bull and I'm a Taurus. I'm the year of the ox and I'm a Taurus. I just can't get away from that hefty sort of look. I think I told you the white represents purity because I had somebody ask me about that. Trying to make sure I got all these. Oh, yes, Blue Rose. There was a documentary and it was on very recently and it was on History Channel and I saw it on YouTube too, but it's these archaeologists found these they found it in a cave that no one knew was there. They just recently found this cave. And in the cave were long snakes, great big snakes. And if you look at their skeletal structure, they'd be very, very big snakes. And they had their heads chopped off, but the whole rest of the snake body was left there in a perfectly coiled position, which is why they know it wasn't an animal that dragged it back there and ate it. Because if animals eat you up, you scattered to the wind. And they were making a big thing about it was this sacrifice to the serpentine gods that they were concerned about, and it was in Spain, and it was in an area where the dragons are not. They can fly through the air. Weirdly enough, they think they can't really. In the legends, they flew through the air, and but they didn't have wings like we would think of. They didn't have legs like we would think of them, and I remember one of the other things when I was reading through, they were talking about how in Mesopotamia and the Assyrians and some of the other groups and that they're finding, that are old civilizations, that they believed that the serpents were wise, and they think that that whole thing about making the serpent the bad guy in the Bible was because they wanted knowledge, and serpents and dragon-like creatures in the Middle East and the Indo-European and on into India are related to wisdom. So, I mean, it's fascinating when we see how our legends kind of smash into each other. I don't know if you guys had much of a background when you went to school, but okay. Okay. There's a school of thought that man and dinosaurs existed together, particularly in South America. And some of the ancient hidden pyramids and other temples, like us, there was a Stegosaurus in one. Yeah. Uh, sort of, when I asked Cecil about that, and he said they could appear and then not appear. So some of what we think may have been then, is really an appearance they're making, like I'm seeing Cecil now. But that does not mean Cecil he's energetically here with me. Just like in a way you're energetically here with me because y'all turned, yet you knew what right dials to put on and get to your Zoom. Obviously, earlier in the show, I didn't know how to communicate, but I learned. So, okay, we're right at 55 minutes. I'm pretty much talked out. I'm trying to think if there's any other. I think when we try to, yeah, I had, when they actually, another medium told me that my dragon's name was Cecil. And when I asked him, he said yes. And Cecil the C6 sea serpent was on the TV when I came home from school. So I did think about that. Yeah, I think the dragons will present themselves in ways that you can like, because like Cecil looks like a totally friendly guy. And, he's loves taking me into that. Thank you, Cold Toes. I appreciate it. Ancient, oh. Yeah, Ancient Aliens, my favorite source for incredibly interesting academic information. They have done a lot on that. The way they do it is that ETs came in and we turned them into these mythical creatures, which is how I would have seen it. Oh, good. Okay. And that is how we would see them. But Cecil said no, that they're of this planet and their energy is somewhat different than ETs. I can see Cecil. I can't see ETs. And I've had contact with them. I've been kidnapped by them one night when I didn't really want to go back up to where I was supposed to get my orders from. I said, no, I'm tired. Leave me alone. They took me. So I lost I lost 3 hours out of my life that night. So I'm trying to say, yeah, I was interested in the North American connection because I always think of them exploring in caves in Europe or the Saint George who slew the dragon. I never particularly liked this little girl being in distress, so daddy has to come save me from the monsters. But the one thing I will tell you, when you read a lot of those legends, those folks were more than happy to throw their virgin daughters out if it kept the floodwaters where it's supposed to be, it kept the crops coming. Man, it was as bad a time to be a girl as now, which everyone, Rovember, they've already started voting in some states. I don't care if you have to stand in line. Wear your comfy shoes or figure out how you can vote by mail, but go vote, or we're all going to be back in the Middle Ages and the dragons we're going to be meeting look like Mitch McConnell, which ought to scare the crap out of you. I just ordered my past life garden and chakra keys. Yes, if you didn't see it, you can go back and find on Dozen Cats for Me on Kelly's channel. I did a whole lot of past life readings on Sunday, and it was great fun. And we're going to rotate that. I think once every 2 weeks, we're going to do it on my channel. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll do it on hers. We're going to go back and forth till people get to understand about past lives. Because I think past lives are one of the most interesting things you can study. I think you need to study it and figure it out and work with it emotionally and get in touch with it. Because the biggest thing that used to frighten me about doing past lives was people would get so hung up on, oh my God, this happened to me in the Middle Ages and I can't ever work my way out of it. That's not how it works, kids. Okay, and yay, Carmela. And I've had 3 different people write me that, come through my email telling me they had been inspired after I said how easy it was to figure out how to work as a clerk, and they're going to work as clerks. I applied, and because I've worked with candidates before, including a couple that are on the ballots, I'm not allowed to do it. And that means they're handling it the right way, because if you've been working with a candidate, you should not be allowed to do it. And Libra Lady voted absentee in Michigan. Yay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things. And we're all here to work on our family's karma. But okay, 30 seconds. You couldn't find it on Sunday, Vicky? And she's working election day. That's why she wants to get out there and vote today. Yeah, go vote. Go vote so that we can truly say that young girls being fed to the dragons is a myth. And we can move on. And that's it, guys. We're at 1 hour. And thank you so much for coming. And I hope it wasn't too wandering and boring, but it highlights how far we are not from the past. And this is the past. Because according to Cecil, these guys have been here since we were Pangea and before the Lumerians came. So anyway, take care. Bye.